This hearing will come to order. This hearing, titled The Trump Administration's Fiscal Year 2020 Budget and U.S. Policy Towards Latin America and the Caribbean, will focus on the Trump administration's budget request and its policy priorities for the Western Hemisphere. Without objection, all members may have 5 days to submit statements, questions, strenuous materials for the record, subject to the length limitation in the rules. I will now make an opening statement and then turn it over to Ranking Member for his opening statement. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today. I wanted to hold this hearing since the beginning of this Congress. Unfortunately, the former Assistant Secretary for Western Hemisphere Affairs refused to testify before this subcommittee, despite numerous invitations and requests. All recent Senate-confirmed Assistant Secretary of States for Western Hemisphere Affairs testified multiple times before House Foreign Affairs Committee during their tenures. It was a disservice to Congress, to the constituents we were elected to represent, and to those diplomats who serve under Assistant Secretary Kim Breyer that she chose to stonewall Congress. It should go without saying, but testifying before Congress is not optional. I am appreciative that Ambassador Kozak immediately recognized the importance of this hearing, and I am encouraged that we have an acting Assistant Secretary with such distinguished record of public service. The challenges facing the United States leadership in the Western Hemisphere are immense. In Venezuela, the Maduro dictatorship has managed to cling to power, even in the face of severe humanitarian crisis that the Maduro regime created. I commend the Colombian people and the Colombian government for their admirable response to the Venezuela crisis. I am proud of our diplomats and staff on the ground who have worked tirelessly to promote a democratic transition and provide humanitarian support and development assistance to the Venezuelan people. That said, I am concerned about the impact of this crisis the longer it drags on, and I will be asking our witnesses today to provide a clear strategy for our Venezuela policy going forward. In the Northern Triangle, forced gang recruitment, extortion, domestic violence, poverty, and the impacts of climate change are among many factors forcing people to migrate north. Unfortunately, under this administration, U.S. policy towards the Northern Triangle ignores that complex reality. In March, the Trump administration announced draconian cuts of over $400 million in U.S. assistance to Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. Administration officials reached this decision without consulting Congress or even assessing the impact of our assistance programs on migration flows to the United States. Since imposing those cuts, administration officials have coerced Northern Triangle governments into signing safe third-country agreements, which aims to deny people who are fleeing violence the right to seek asylum in the United States. The Trump administration seems to believe that we can stop migration by criminalizing desperation. I strongly disagree with the approach. I believe that the U.S. must instead work as a partner to create conditions so that Hondurans, Guatemalans, and Salvadorians can see a future in their home countries. We must also reclaim our commitment to combating government corruption in Guatemala in an effort that the Bush administration and bipartisan members of Congress long championed, but which this administration has backed away from. I am convinced that China's increased presence in the region poses a threat to U.S. interests. However, cutting our foreign assistance to the region by nearly 30%, as this administration proposed in its budget request, will only worsen the problem. We will not overcome the challenges posed by China by cutting foreign assistance and strong-arming our allies. True alliances based on mutual respect are Americans' comparative advantage over China. We need to deepen our engagement with the region in order to regain our competitive edge. Moreover, if we're going to play a leadership role in addressing the many crises facing the region, we must be seen as an honest broker. We must call on Bolivian authorities to ensure the election results reflect the will of the people. We must stand in solidarity with the Haitian people who are suffering under crippling poverty and are asking only that the political leaders finally start doing what they were elected to do. And we must continue to support brave activists in Cuba and Nicaragua who are demanding basic human rights, even in the face of severe repression. I look forward to a productive discussion on these and many other challenges in the Western Hemisphere. I hope we can all agree on a path forward for the United States to deepen engagement with our allies and advance our shared interests in the Western Hemisphere. Thank you, and I now turn to Ranking Member Rooney for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Cyrus, I want to thank you for holding this long overdue budget hearing. And as you commented, I want to thank Secretary Kozak, Administrator Varsa, and Secretary Glenn for underscoring the importance of this hearing and for being here today. Oversight of the administration's foreign aid budget for the Western Hemisphere is among this subcommittee's most important responsibilities. And in light of concerning attempts to cut aid to the region, I'm glad to finally have this opportunity. Today, we will review the Trump administration's $1.2 billion 2020 request and discuss the administration's priorities for the region. The prosperity and stability of the region is vital to United States national security interests, and in many ways, this administration has demonstrated that it understands this. Inconsistent and episodic United States attention to the region is a chronic problem, and perhaps more than previous administrations, the Trump administration has paid significant attention to Latin America. For example, since 2017, the president's made one visit to Argentina, Vice President Pence has made 5 visits to the region, and Secretary Pompeo has made 6. The administration has also shown its unquestioned commitment to democracy in the region by clearly condemning the dictatorships in Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua, and standing up for human rights. I commend the Trump administration for applying sanctions to corrupt actors and human rights violators in these countries and for their commitment to supporting the brave people who risk their lives for freedom every day in Latin America. I also commend the administration for making the United States the first country to recognize Venezuelans' interim President Guaido and for continuing to lead the world in supporting the legitimate National Assembly and peaceful democratic transition in Venezuela. Despite initial concerns over the administration's opposition to NAFTA, the new USMCA actually seems to improve our strong relationship with Mexico. We also continue to maintain our critical relationship with Colombia and Argentina and are taking advantage of opportunities to strengthen our ties with Brazil, Ecuador, Panama, Peru, and Chile. However, security and economic challenges continue to plague the Northern Triangle countries of Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, triggering an unprecedented wave of irregular migration to our southern border. We also continue to face the threat from transnational crime and even Hezbollah in South America. Recent social unrest in Ecuador and Chile and the blatant irregularities seen in Sunday's presidential elections in Bolivia demonstrate the fragile state of the region's democratic institutions. We must also address the threat which climate change poses to rural and indigenous populations throughout the region, and we've seen great instances of this recently in Guatemala, and how this also contributes to migration, not only to our border, but throughout the hemisphere. China's growing influence in the region threatens our national security and continues to be a concern, threatening to erode democratic values, perpetuate systemic corruption, and undermine the rule of law. Colombia's granting of the country's largest infrastructure project in their history to a Chinese consortium, part of which has been barred by the World Bank, is the most recent and very concerning example of malign Chinese influence throughout the region. I want to commend the State Department for successfully stopping an equally bad investment of China in El Salvador. To be clear, we don't want to dictate who sovereign nations deal with, but we do want to guarantee a level playing field. The U.S. must continue to strongly engage in Latin America and the Caribbean and facilitate conditions where United States private investment can thrive. Energy security and disaster resilience in the Caribbean are other opportunities for American investment. I'm deeply concerned about continued cuts in U.S. financial support to Latin America and the Caribbean, and especially about the cutting of aid to the Northern Triangle. Our foreign assistance is a critical tool to advance our national interest and address the aforementioned challenges. I want to thank our witnesses again for being here today. look forward to their testimonies and look forward also to hearing their thoughts on the budget and how we can maintain our strategic influence in Latin America and the Caribbean. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Ranking Member Rooney. I will now introduce the Honorable Michael G. Kozak, Acting Assistant Secretary for Western Hemisphere Affairs. Previously, Ambassador Kozak held 2 Acting Assistant Secretary roles in the Bureau of Inter-American Affairs and the Bureau for Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor. Prior to this appointment, he held the role of Senior Director of the National Security Council staff and served as the United States Ambassador to Belarus and the Chief of Mission in Cuba. Ambassador Kozak, welcome. We will then hear from the Honorable John Varsa, Assistant Administrator for the Bureau of Latin America and the Caribbean at the United States Agency for International Development. Prior to his appointment, Mr. Varsa served as the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary at the Department of Homeland Security's Office of Partnership and Engagement. He also served in the United States Army Reserves with the 11th Special Forces Group and later the Civil Affairs Battalion. Mr. Varsa, thank you for your service and for being here today. Finally, we will hear from Mr. Richard Glenn, Deputy Assistant Secretary of State in the Bureau of International Narcotics and Law Enforcement Affairs. In his current role, Mr. Glenn oversees the Office of Anti-Crime Programs and Western Hemisphere Programs. He began his work with the INL in 2011 as Deputy Director of the Merida Initiative in Mexico City and has also served in Ecuador and Argentina. Mr. Glenn, thank you for being here. I ask the witnesses to please limit your testimony to 5 minutes, and without objection, your prepared written statements will be made part of the record. Assistant Secretary Kozak, I will turn to you for your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Rooney and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on the fiscal year 2020 foreign assistance request for the Western Hemisphere. This is a time of great challenge and opportunity in the region. If we are successful in our efforts to promote democracy in Venezuela, Cuba, and Nicaragua, and we intend to be, we will need to provide assistance that is qualitatively and quantitatively different than what we are providing at present to combat the repressive regimes that hold those countries hostage. We expect our partners in Central America to show political will to break with the past, to curb unsafe and illegal immigration and corruption, and to allow all of their citizens to pursue prosperity for themselves and their families. If they do so, they will find us ready to provide significant assistance. But for those who seek to maintain the status quo, we will not let them use our assistance as a facade for their lack of political will to make real reform. Given these challenges and opportunities, Mr. Chairman, we have proposed assistance programs with the recognition that they may need to be significantly reshaped in coordination with you and the subcommittee as events unfold in the region. Our $1.19 billion request prioritizes programs that address trafficking in drugs and smuggling of people by transnational criminal organizations. And we seek to create an environment for increased U.S. trade and investment, security, and prosperity in the region to benefit our interests. Our assistance strengthens border security and combats corruption. These programs work if the partner governments are truly committed. So we expect our partners to stand up against corruption and against those who seek to preserve the economic and governance status quo. The request for the Western Hemisphere includes 8 primary components. For Venezuela, we are requesting $9 million to support democratic actors, but we also are asking for $500 million transfer authority that would provide flexibility to expand U.S. support for a democratic transition and to meet Maduro-imposed regional migration challenges. We will continue to direct U.S. foreign assistance resources to support Venezuelan democracy as represented by the democratically elected National Assembly and Interim President Guaido. We are requesting $78.9 million for Mexico. Of this, 76.25 is for the Merida Initiative to combat illicit poppy cultivation, heroin production, and fentanyl trafficking. It also supports Mexican efforts to reduce violence and promote greater respect for human rights. $445 million is proposed for El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras. We expect the governments of these three countries to take action to reduce illegal immigration to the United States in time to be factored into the 2020 appropriations process. Last week, the President supported some targeted foreign assistance aimed at advancing our joint efforts to deter illegal immigration from those countries. But our programs cannot be a substitute for political will. The governments of El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras must demonstrate that they are willing to stand up to those who profit from the status quo, which generates large numbers of illegal immigrants arriving at the U.S. southern border. For Colombia, we are requesting $344.4 million for counter-narcotics efforts and peace implementation. Colombia has shown the political will necessary to confront the severe challenge of coca production. Colombia continues to absorb the largest influx of Venezuelans fleeing the crisis in their country, and we will continue to support Colombia as it responds to these migration flows. In Haiti, the $145.5 million request serves to promote good governance and advance economic growth. It will continue to build the capacity of the Haitian National Police and to support assistance to reduce the prevalence of HIV/AIDS. We urge the elected representatives of the Haitian people to take steps necessary to stabilize democratic governance. For Peru, the $55.1 million request will support efforts to combat the illicit drug trade and transnational criminal organizations through tightly paired eradication and alternative development programs. Caribbean Basin Security Initiative remains critical to combat crime and violence. The $40.2 million request will strengthen law enforcement capacity and improve justice institutions. Finally, the request includes $6 million to support democracy, human rights, and civil society in Cuba, $1 million for democracy programming for Ecuador, and another $6 million for democracy in Nicaragua. Again, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, if our policies are successful in promoting change, we will welcome the opportunity to consult with you to take advantage of such positive developments. Look forward to your questions. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Assistant Administrator Varsa, you're recognized.
Chairman Theodores, Ranking Member Rooney, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the invitation to testify today. I'm grateful for the committee's bipartisan support for USAID's work in Latin America and the Caribbean. USAID is requesting $547 million in FY 2020 resources for programs that advance U.S. national security and economic prosperity, demonstrate American generosity, and promote a path to recipient self-reliance and resilience. Our most pressing priority is Venezuela. Nicolás Maduro's inept political and economic policies, corruption, and the use of fear and violence have caused a humanitarian and political crisis that overflows the borders of Venezuela. The United States stands in solidarity with Venezuelans and the government of interim President Guaidó. We've provided nearly $644 million in humanitarian and development assistance to support programs inside Venezuela and throughout the region. With FY 2020 resources, USAID will continue programs that support human rights, civil society, independent media, electoral oversight, and the democratically elected National Assembly. We are also supporting democratic actors in Nicaragua and Cuba. With bipartisan support from Congress, we remain committed to helping Nicaraguan NGOs and political activists as they seek change in peaceful, democratic ways. USAID programs in Cuba support human rights, the free flow of information, civil society, and humanitarian assistance to political prisoners and their families. In other countries, we seek to build upon progress we have made in recent years. USAID helps to advance programs in Colombia that further a just and sustainable peace, economic development, citizen security, and a culture of legality in former conflict zones. In Mexico, our programs work to prevent crime, improve access to justice, and strengthen civil society. In Brazil, USAID works to conserve biodiversity while advancing prosperity through responsible economic development. Our assistance in Peru helps reduce the production and trafficking of illicit drugs by supporting economically viable alternatives to growing coca. We welcome the recent decision to partially move forward with certain targeted U.S. foreign assistance activities in El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras. The success of our work depends on the leadership and political will of our host country partners. Using data shared with us by U.S. Customs and Border Protection, we are better targeting current and potential programs. We are also specifically adding migration metrics to assess the impact of our work. As Assistant Administrator, I'm committed to working with our partners in El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras to address the root causes of illegal immigration to the United States. The U.S. government places a high priority on our work under the U.S. Strategy for Engagement in the Caribbean. Just last week, we announced $5 million to reduce electricity prices, increase service quality, and make electricity systems in the Caribbean more resilient. And today, we have announced a $2 million partnership with the Caribbean Institute for Meteorology and Hydrology to help countries address their risks and improve disaster response. USAID was proud to stand with the Bahamian government with humanitarian assistance in the immediate aftermath of Hurricane Dorian. I recently traveled to the Bahamas with Administrator Green when he announced an additional $7.5 million to help with relief and recovery, which brought USAID's total humanitarian assistance to nearly $34 million. We remain in close contact with the Bahamian government about their plans and needs regarding long-term recovery. In Haiti, where political instability and violence reminds us that progress continues to be fragile, USAID resources address poverty, food security, healthcare services, and advance accountable government institutions. I'm particularly excited about the recent developments in our relationship with Ecuador. Thanks to President Moreno's re-engagement with the United States, Administrator Green signed a Memorandum of Understanding with the government of Ecuador in May 2019, and we plan to reopen an office in the next year. We are also continuing to monitor the extensive development needs and political situation in Bolivia. After expelling USAID in 2013, Morales has given no indication that he's willing to work with the United States. However, he recently requested assistance from USAID to fight the Amazon fires. In conclusion, this is just a short overview of our programs and plans for FY2020 resources. We'll continue to work on the prosperity, security, and good governance programs that encourage people to build better societies for their families and home communities. I thank the subcommittee for its interest and support of our work. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Mr. Glenn, you're recognized.
Chairman Sirius, Ranking Member Rooney, members of the subcommittee, it's a pleasure to be here today to testify on the President's FY2020 budget request and the policy priorities for the Western Hemisphere. The efforts of the Department of State's Bureau of International Narcotics and Law Enforcement Affairs, better known as INL, are vital to our national security interests. INL builds the capacity of foreign partners to disrupt transnational crime and other security threats before they reach our borders. Our request of $484 million will enable INL to address the most pressing security issues directly affecting the United States. We will prioritize combating drug trafficking organizations and transnational gangs. We will address the deadly opioid epidemic in the United States, and we will work with Mexico and Central America to address the migration crisis at our southern border. The $209 million request for Colombia represents the largest portion of our request. Colombia remains the world's largest producer of cocaine and is the source of over 90% of the cocaine seized in the United States. The majority of funding will support our joint commitment with the Colombian government to cut coca cultivation and cocaine production levels in half by the end of 2023. We are on target to reach that goal. Last year, illicit coca cultivation decreased for the first time since 2012. Coca eradication is a cornerstone of this support. With our support, President Duque has quadrupled the number of manual eradicators and achieved the highest level of manual eradication in the last 7 years. We will support the restart of a safe and effective Colombian-led aerial eradication program. However, eradication is only part of the solution. These efforts must be joined by expanded police presence, crop substitution, and alternative development activities to sustainably reduce cocaine production. INL, along with USAID and the government of Colombia, have agreed to a focused implementation of these types of programs in key areas to sustain counter-narcotics gains. These efforts, combined with our support for interdiction, anti-money laundering, asset forfeiture, and justice sector reform, will deliver the results that we all seek. Closer to home, Mexico is the origin of most heroin and methamphetamine consumed here and remains the major transit zone for cocaine destined for the United States. We are alarmed at the emergence of fentanyl production in Mexico. Our work with Mexico seeks to intensify counter-narcotics cooperation through strengthening border security, increasing the operational capacity of law enforcement units, and ensuring the Mexican criminal justice system serves its citizenry and ends impunity. Our programs build the capacity of Mexican criminal justice actors to attack each component of the organized crime business model, to reduce drug production, control cross-border trafficking, remove illicit profits, and restore government control over all its territory. As the President has noted, Mexico needs to do more to root out organized crime. 2 weeks ago, INL Assistant Secretary Madison traveled to Mexico to urge them to develop and share a comprehensive counter-narcotics strategy, an especially urgent task given the events of last week in Mexico. In Central America, INL increases our partners' ability to stop drug trafficking, combats organized crime, and addresses security-related drivers of migration. INL will expand our maritime interdiction efforts with an eye towards enhanced bilateral and multilateral information sharing and operations. In El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras, we will continue to address the security-related drivers of migration. Transnational gangs like MS-13 perpetuate violence, insecurity, and commit acts of extortion in Central America and in the United States. We will support vetted units and specialized task forces to investigate and prosecute cases and to serve as reliable, trusted partners of U.S. law enforcement. Our efforts focus on multinational approaches to collect, analyze, and disseminate intelligence to identify criminals and transnational crime trends in the region. We remain committed to strengthening justice sector institutions and confronting the foundational threats posed by endemic corruption. The challenges we face are serious, but we are seeing results, especially when partner countries have the political will to put our assistance to proper use. Obviously, more work remains to sustain these gains. Our FY2020 request is critical to those efforts. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Secretary Kozak, I'm going to start with something that's close to home. You know, in May, I sent a letter with 8 of my colleagues from New Jersey to Secretary Pompeo, asking the State Department to help resolve an issue of land bonds owed by the Peruvian government to pensioners in my state. It's about $57 million. Is there any way that we can approach Peru to see if they can pay what they owe? I have 72,000 pensioners in my state that are concerned about the money that Peru is not paying. So I would ask you if you could, in your travels, when you speak to the Peruvian government, tell them that we're well aware that they haven't paid the bills. And as someone who, in 2009, voted for the Peruvian Free Trade Agreement, I kind of feel like it was a slap in the face what they're doing to the state of New Jersey. So do you have any idea if they intend to pay this?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, and indeed, your letter to the Secretary has had effect. The Secretary himself has raised it with the senior levels of the Peruvian government. I already, in my interactions with them, have raised the same issue. And it's interesting you mentioned the 2009 agreement. What has happened is that agreement had a provision in it that allowed American claimants to bring arbitration cases with Peru, and at least the holders of the bulk of those bonds have brought such an arbitration case, is my understanding. I believe it's to be heard at the beginning of next year. In the conversations we've had with the Peruvians, they are saying they will, of course, abide by the result of that arbitration. So I think it's in a process now that hopefully will lead to a result in the not-too-distant future, but very much on our minds, and we appreciate you having brought it to our attention.
You know, this is, they asked America to invest, and they asked for people in different countries to do certain things, and then we don't get paid. I think Argentina had some issues with that also. So it's very hard to get the people to invest and then not get paid. That's just, I don't understand. I'm going to talk a little bit about something that's very bothersome to me. I remember the Merida initiative. I guess this will go to you, Mr. Glenn. We have invested close to $2 billion in Mexico on the Merida initiative. And the homicide rate in August was the highest on record. Is it worth it, continue to invest money in Mexico? I mean, the other day, I saw that the Sinaloa took over a town of 1 million people. And Mexico basically walked away. That's very disturbing to me, as someone who supported the Mérida Initiative right from the beginning. Where are we with this Mérida Initiative?
First, if I may, I want to recognize and thank the many members of Mexican law enforcement and military who wear the uniform and who are patriots to their nation and who are dedicated to the fight against transnational organized crime. They are there. Many of them are personal friends of mine and are respected colleagues and associates. They are passionate about the work that they do. They believe in upholding the rule of law. And one of the things that we have been able to do through the Mérida Initiative is to equip and build their capacity to be able to confront organized crime. We know that they're capable. We know because we helped build that capacity. As I mentioned in my testimony, I think what is of greatest importance at this moment is that Mexico develop and share with us a comprehensive strategy to confront transnational organized crime. Without that strategy, and without us knowing what that strategy is and being able to match our funding and our abilities with their strategic direction, we won't see progress. But obviously, with the events of last week were very concerning to us.
But it's been 10 years that we've been giving money through this initiative, and we still don't have a plan to deal with international. Is that what you're telling me?
I think what we need to see is a greater political commitment from the highest levels of government in Mexico.
Thank you. Ranking Member Rooney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I might start by asking Administrator Varsa about what the programs we have in place to deal with climate change in Latin America. I think you mentioned that during your testimony, and I know that AID is doing some things that I've heard about.
Oh, we do. Well, certainly, we don't have, regarding climate change, we're certainly not in a position to adjudicate, causality or anything like that, but we certainly do have programs to deal with the effects of weather in any number of sectors. Certainly, our work in the Amazon in Brazil, we're looking at how the weather effects, we're working with indigenous groups on preservation of the rainforest. We had some announcements we made today about $2 million for increased ability to monitor hurricanes and weather events. We announced on a few days ago $5 million to invest in the Caribbean Renewable Energy Forum, which also is going to increase energy resiliency within the Caribbean. We are also looking at programs, certainly in Western Highlands of Guatemala and other places. We're certainly cognizant of the effect of weather changes, so we're looking for food security where applicable. It cuts across the region, any number of activities.
Secretary Kozak, do you have any comment? Because we talked about this a little the other day. Those articles have been about Guatemala with the impact on the coffee production and everything.
Yes, sir. There's been a drought in the region and some severe consequence for a lot of the growers there, and AID has been working programs. I think, though, what I would add is that in addition to trying to deal with the immediate effects of climate and so on, what we're looking for is some real reform in these countries so that people are not in a position where, a bad turn in the weather, hurricane coming through or a year's worth of drought or something is going to, destroy them or destroy their lives. We need to get to see these economies become much more robust and growing and have more diversity in the types of activity. So there's both the immediate problem, how you deal with these effects of weather disasters, but then the broader problem of how do you end up with economies that are not heavily dependent on subsistence farming and that kind of thing.
Thank you. The other question I might ask, start with you, Secretary Kozak, is now that we got this new thing in Bolivia that, you know, what do you think we can do there?
Yes, sir. Well, one thing we did do was fully support the election observation mission that the Organization of American States put in place, as well as some affiliated election observers. You know, the Bolivians have had the opportunity to have a good, clean election. It was in the process of moving forward, and then inexplicably they stopped counting the votes, and then are announcing inconsistent results. Our urging to them, and we're making it both publicly and privately, is that they respect the votes that were cast by the Bolivian people. It's not that hard to determine how they cast their votes. They have actas that show the count, and you know, they should do that and abide by the result. If they don't, we are making clear that there's going to be some serious consequences in their relationships throughout the region. Prior to this, they've been considered a democratically elected government, even though they sometimes have had policies and attitudes towards us that weren't all that productive, like throwing out USAID a few years back. But we treated them as a legitimately elected
Yeah,
government.
the Post ran that article last week about how it's maybe socialistic, but it seems to be working for the people.
Yeah, well, at this point, I think it's not working for the people if you don't let the people make a choice. Right now, my colleague, Ambassador Carlos Trujillo, is at the OAS. They're having a permanent council meeting on this, and I think you'll see a pretty strong response from the whole hemisphere. This is not just a U.S.-Bolivia thing. It's a democracy in the region versus an effort to interfere with it.
How many votes do you think you'll get?
I'm not going to speculate, sir. My guess, though, is it's going to be pretty strong in terms of the democracies in the region. I mean, this is the kind of thing that the Inter-American Democratic Charter and so on was designed to deal with. Is you can't have elections and then just ignore the results.
Right. Thank you.
Congressman Gonzalez.
Thank you, and I want to thank the panel for being here with us today. Last spring, the Mexican government announced, I'm going to change the subject a little bit to Mexico and something follow up to what the chairman was talking about. But last spring, the Mexican government announced the Safe Highway Pilot Program. I'm not sure, maybe Mr. Glenn might be familiar with this, but I was particularly excited. I flew down to Mexico City. I met with Secretary Durazo because I have a huge concern of the trade route from Monterrey to the border to my district in Texas, where a lot of trade and tourism crosses, and it's become highly dangerous. In fact, I haven't crossed into Reynosa in 11 years, and sometimes they say it's safer than others, but at the end of the day, it still is not completely safe, and it's not where it used to be. They agreed to honor my request, and they put Highway 40 into this pilot program of safe highways. However, to this date, I haven't seen time bars. It really has not become a reality. I've seen nothing come to fruition, and unfortunately, you know, I think it's very impactful to trade, and I'm surprised when we're talking taxes and tariffs in our trade agreement that we're not talking about security costs and extortion costs that many people in the business community, including Americans doing business in Mexico, are forced to pay, and it doesn't seem like it's been addressed forcefully enough. Are you aware of the risk drivers of both cargo and tourist passengers faced driving down Highway 40 or other highways, I'm sure, in Mexico? That they told me this was the 17th most dangerous, but to me it's the most important that they're dealing with. Are you familiar with this program or any other programs intended to address the insecurity on Mexico's highways and trade routes like Highway 40? And what steps is the U.S. government taking to address these concerns? I very rarely hear about it here on the Hill or anywhere else, and I thought that not addressing this while we're talking about trade and USMCA would be a missed opportunity Growing up in South Texas, I remember the day when we would cross the border, and it was just another extension of our community. And I used to drive to Monterey and spend the weekend and come back. And as a lawyer, I did a lot of business in Mexico. And all that changed about 12 years ago and has progressively gotten worse. And I'll have government officials come and tell me, you know, that things have improved and it's safer now, but it's really not. And what are we doing, and what more can we do to address this? And do you think right now, while we're talking about USMCA, do you think that this would be the appropriate time to address this and maybe apply some pressure to get something done? And it's appalling that we've spent $2 billion, which I know is a right investment if you get the right result, but I don't see the result. And this is my second term in Congress, and it's pretty frustrating to see what's happening in Mexico. And I know trade has been successful, but there are a lot of issues happening on the border. I hear of exporters that have an extra line item on the Mexican custom brokers that are to pay the bad guys, if you will, and many stories, as I'm sure you guys have probably heard about. What do you have to say to this? What can we do? I'm really disenchanted with what's happening, and I'm very concerned. It's impacted the local economy in South Texas. We had a lot of tourism. We had $1 billion a year of legitimate Mexican business deposits in banks in South Texas. They've been impacted. The tourist industry has been impacted. Our sales taxes are down, all because of insecurity. When I talk to my friends in Monterey, Mexico, and I say, hey, I'm going to be in town for the weekend, why don't you come up? They're like, you know, I don't go anymore because I feel like I'm risking my life and my family's life. These are the good people in Mexico that are not allowed to come because of the insecurity. And I think we could do a lot more. I think we've really failed. And to hear a $2 billion figure that's been expended and you still can't drive to Monterey, clearly something's broken. And what can we do to make it better? And what information would you have that maybe I don't have? Thank you.
So, thank you, Congressman. I'd be happy to address the security aspect of that. The Mexican government is currently undergoing a transition from what was the federal police that had responsibility for the highways and highway safety, basically their highway patrol. With the creation of their National Guard, the federal police is being disbanded and absorbed into that National Guard entity. My view from at least Washington is that transition, as transitions that are that big normally go, is rough, and they are going through some difficulties in transitioning to that new National Guard structure, and it will be some time before they're fully on their feet. At the moment, as far as I know, the Mexicans haven't asked formally for assistance in the formation of that National Guard. Of course, we stand ready to provide assistance that's tied to U.S. national security goals if they so sought. Again, I would go back to the criticality of the Mexican government at the highest levels developing a national security strategy, and one that is specific to counter-narcotics and organized crime. Without that, it's difficult to organize
Right.
a
But this
government reaction.
This transition is the last year. How about the 9 years prior to this, while we were dishing out $2 billion? And really, I think we should have more accountability and wanting to see a result of that investment, especially places that Americans visit and do business in. And I'm really upset. I just sent a letter to the Mexican ambassadors, and I'm for this trade agreement. I'm for trade. It's transformed our region, and it's been good for all three countries involved. But I'm about the point to pull my vote if they don't do something about this. And I think we need to do more. And I think while we're talking about trade, it would be a missed opportunity to not talk about the insecurity when we're talking about taxes and tariffs, and we're paying extortion fees and extra security costs. How is that not a tax or a tariff? That's my personal opinion.
Thank you, Congressman. Congressman Buck. Sorry, Mr. Curtis. You don't look like Buck.
That's the nicest thing you've said all day.
I apologize.
No worries. Thank you very much. Thank you to each of the three of you for being here. I'd like to use my comments to emphasize 3 points that have been bouncing around in my head in relationship to travel that I've had in this region. And the first is more of a comment than it is a question, and that is my strong belief that your success in this region is incredibly important and vital to the United States, that every bit of success you have adds to the peace and prosperity that we have here in the United States, that our investment in time and energy and the men and women that work not just for you but in that region for the United States are doing very important work. And so I'd just like to emphasize that and thank you all and the many people that you represent. The second is concern about China, their influence in the region that seems to be widespread. China has engaged in an aggressive campaign to convince countries to switch their allegiance from Taiwan to China. I actually have a bill that addresses this. It's called the Taipei Act, and I hope this committee will pick this bill up and quickly address it. I worry that our effort, our U.S. dollar spent in that region are a small percent compared to the influence of China and their maligning influence, and I'm wondering if you can address that and give us some hope that, that we can counter these efforts or that we need to do more.
Well, thank you, Mr. Curtis, first for the nice words about our people who, of all three of our activities that are working in the region. I mean, they're out there every day on the front lines trying to, for exactly the reasons you indicate, trying to improve things because it does contribute directly to our security and prosperity. Second, on China, we've put a substantial effort into this, and my principal deputy has been in our bureau the main spark plug behind this thing. And I think we are making some progress. What we are trying to get across to people in the region is to say, look, yes, you should trade with China. We trade with China. It's a big country. It's a big market. It's a big, but trade on your terms. Trade on terms that are fair and reciprocal and transparent. China is following to me, it appears like a 19th century imperialist model. In mercantilist and government agencies and so on. And this is why we can't compete directly in terms of what kinds of money they put out there to bribe people or to stick other countries with unsustainable debts and this kind of thing. But what we can do is say to the other countries, look, here are the kinds of things that they've been doing around the world. Don't fall for it. Don't get tricked into this. Deal with them, but deal with them on 21st century terms, and deal with us, and we're ready to compete on a level playing field. What we are seeing, I think we're seeing real progress at the national level, that national governments are becoming much more cautious and reading the fine print and so on. What we're seeing now, and maybe it's a sign of that success, is that China is trying to move to the municipal and provincial level in these countries and see if they can find ways to make inroads there. So we're going to keep trying to compete with them on that basis.
Mr. Varsa, you're ready to say something, I can tell.
Well, because I'm ready to say something because I'm so proud of the model that USAID has for the region compared to the Chinese model. Our model of development is truly a model where we have countries on a journey to self-reliance. As Administrator Green has said, the goal of our foreign assistance is to get countries to the point where foreign assistance is not needed. So the best thing we're doing right now is providing a contrast to the Chinese model, which is one of dependency. It's really not development in any form that we recognize.
I've seen that, and I agree with you, and my worry is the tantalizing nature of their deal versus our long-term sustained help sometimes, I think, doesn't get compared the way you would like it to.
Well, to follow up with Ambassador Kozak said, one of the things we're also doing is we're sharing lessons learned. So oftentimes the Chinese will come in selling X and delivering Y, so we want to make sure other countries have informed decisions and they get these stories about how these.
Thank you. I'm going to run out of time. I want to make my last point, and that is that of Venezuela, and my great fear that despite all of our best efforts, it's still not enough. And knowing that we've got to find a way to help the good people there and the countries that surround them and are helping them as well. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm out of time, and I yield.
Mr. Levin?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'm going to have my beloved chairman give me the hook when we're out of time, because I have a lot of questions, and if I don't know if there's other folks waiting on the other side, I definitely don't want to block anyone else, and then I have to go to the floor to give an amendment. I thank you all so much for coming. I want to start by asking a question about a country that others, or some questions that others may not ask about, which is Haiti. Earlier this week, the New York Times reported on the ongoing political and economic crisis there, and I want to read you a little excerpt from that powerful and very bleak piece. Gas shortages are worsening by the day. Hospitals have cut services or closed entirely. Public transportation is ground to a halt. Businesses have shuttered. Most schools have been closed since early September, leaving millions of children idle with no end in sight. Widespread layoffs have compounded chronic poverty and hunger. Uncertainty hangs over everything. Ambassador Kozak, has the State Department engaged with the Moise administration on anti-corruption and accountability efforts in the wake of the Petrocaribe investigation?
Yes, Mr. Levin. In fact,
You have, and can you tell me what progress has been achieved?
no, I was going to give you the broader engagement with them, with Haiti,
Well, I'm particularly interested in this.
on Petrocaribe.
Anti-corruption and accountability in the wake of the Petrocaribe ongoing scandal.
No, I'll have to get you. I don't know if my colleagues have anything on that, but no, we haven't addressed that particularly. I haven't, but I've been on the job for less than a month. So
Oh, my goodness, yes.
People
Well,
may have. And
all right, but if you would follow up, I'd appreciate it.
I would say, though, because the broader problem that you just described is very concerning to us. The first foreign minister I met with when I took the job the first day was the foreign minister of Haiti. And what we're trying intensively to do is get the the two elected parts of the Haitian government to do what they're supposed to do and work with each other and form a government and get over it. Basically, you've got the executive having named a government. The parliament doesn't seem to be able to get to taking a vote on whether to approve it or not. Instead, they're trying to get the president to resign, or some elements are, and that's what's caused the chaos and the paralyzation. Our ambassador there, along with a broad core group of other countries, is working, tirelessly to try to get all the different sides to sit down, come together, and try to find some kind of an accommodation so they can get the government.
Well, if the government is a kleptocracy and is stealing hundreds of millions and billions of dollars meant for the development of the country, I'm not sure how effective that approach will be. Earlier this month, the Miami Herald reported that human rights defenders are calling for investigations into police brutality and misuse of tear gas by the Haitian National Police. During these recent protests, Ambassador, has the State Department raised these serious human rights concerns with the Haitian government?
We raise human rights concerns generally, but let me say, I mean, our experience, and I go back with Haiti 25 years ago. I was special negotiator with Haiti and went through some of the crises then. One of the few institutions there that has been performing reasonably well is the Haitian National Police. It's gone from being a very small organization that was incapable of really policing the place to now having the capability. Are there abuses committed from time to time? Yes. They also, though, as we've helped to build the capacity of the police force, part of that capacity is to do internal investigations when there are allegations of abuse. So we're urging them to use those mechanisms to deal with abuses when they occur. But I wouldn't want to tar the entire organization, since it's actually been doing a pretty good job of trying to control the unrest without committing.
Oh dear. Well, we'll have to talk more about that in the weeks. Honestly, I hope we can, because I'm very, very concerned about what's been happening. The massacre in La Saline, the response after that. I may not share your sunny view of them. I just want to get to another aspect of this. You mentioned 25 years, and okay. The New York Times piece I mentioned talked about the United States' troubling history in Haiti. It notes that during the Cold War, American governments supported, albeit at times grudgingly, the authoritarian governments of François and Jean-Claude Duvalier because of their anti-communist stance. And by the way, I was there in 1980 and again later, and I saw this firsthand as a young student. In January, Haiti broke with precedent and voted with Washington at the OAS to reject the legitimacy of Nicolas Maduro. Now, let me be clear. I believe Maduro is a dictator who's caused the people to suffer. But I also want to be clear on why our government does what it does, or perhaps just as important in this case, what it doesn't do. Does the administration's failure, Ambassador, to more vocally defend human rights and good governance in Haiti, and our government has said very little about this, and it's a disaster happening. Does that failure have anything to do with Haiti's vote at the OAS earlier this year?
I would say not, sir. I headed the Human Rights Bureau before I just transferred over to this job, and in that capacity, we have contributed over the years to the development of many of the human rights groups in Haiti and developing their capacity, and they do a fine job of calling out.
Well, they're crying out for our help, sir. They're
Yeah,
crying out for, and I
some.
respectfully ask you that the administration take a much more public stand on human rights in Haiti. Thanks for your forbearance, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. Congressman Yoho?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the time, and I appreciate your efforts. And I'm hoping my words come out as soothing as Mr. Curtis's, but maybe not. Mr. Rooney opened up with our foreign assistance is a critical foreign diplomacy tool, too valuable not to be utilized properly. And I appreciate those words. And I'm a guy that came up here to get rid of foreign aid, but I found out you're not going to get rid of foreign aid. We led the charge on the BUILD Act, which developed the United States International Development Finance Corporation, but I want it used properly. And so as I listen to all three of you, and I appreciate what all three of you do in the agencies you work with, what I want to do is not grade you, but I want to grade the results. And I think, Mr. Gonzalez, you could hear the frustration on the other side. So our foreign aid goes to rule of law, good governance. I look at Haiti. You were just talking about forming a government in Haiti. Democracy promotion, infrastructure. Again, I'm going to point to Haiti because Haiti today has less than 20% of their population has potable water in the 21st century in the Western Hemisphere. Goes for anti-corruption. I got an article that President Peña of Mexico is accused of taking a $100 million bribe from El Chapo. The anti-drug production and trafficking, and we've been to Colombia. I was there 4 or 5 years ago. They were down to, I think, 185 hectares. They're up over 500 hectares, and I know the policies of what happened, and I know President Duque is working to reduce that in half. And so when I look at all this, and I look at the amount of cocaine coming out of Colombia, other Central American countries, Peru, and 95% of the cocaine coming into America goes through Mexico. Mexico has over 70,000 hectares of heroin growing. That's not for medicinal use. That's directly into my country for our citizens. And so if we were to grade not you, maybe not the agency you're in, but the United States government, I guess the results of what we've done, because we spent billions and billions of dollars. You know, if I look just at the war on drugs, it's over $1 trillion since Nixon started it. If we look in Mexico, it's over $2 billion on the war on drugs. And so if we were to grade the United States policies on a scale, you know, A to D or flunking, where would they be?
Congressman, thank you for your question. So let me start by saying I never would have accepted the nomination to this position if I did not feel that the mission of USAID was in furtherance of U.S. national security and national interests. So yes, there are anecdotes, certainly I found and cognizant of, where maybe aid did not work as intended, but on the counterbalance, there are stories and anecdotes where differences can be made. For example, if I may, in Colombia, USAID has numerous programs in Colombia to help solidify the peace and deal with the Venezuelan crisis as well. So just for example, Colombia has had to deal with 5 decades of war. That chaos at all levels. So an example of a USAID program is making a difference is we're working with the Duque administration for land titling in a place called Ovejas. So this is a USAID program. So what we're happening, this program in here is getting people who didn't have title to the land. What we found is when people have title to the land, the recidivism goes down to less than 25%. But again, it is an incremental program. When I was being confirmed, on the Senate side mostly, I think I was kind of unique in that I said I would be coming back to Congress with example of failures, because I think it's only natural as we try different things that not everything is going to work. But I've committed to then, I committed to you and members of this committee as well, to modify, and we have metrics in place to measure what we do, and when things aren't—
How long have those metrics been in place?
Well, metrics have been in place since the beginning of our programs, but what I've been doing since I've arrived here, I've looked at metrics in different ways.
You know, I'm going to cut you off there because I want to get some points across. You're all talking about, well, and it's almost like a checklist. Well, we do good governance, we do democracy building, we do this, and we check the boxes off. The rhetoric's there, but the actions aren't, or the results. And I look at our policies, and yeah, we agree with everything you say, and it would be wonderful if they would follow through. But then I look at what President Trump did. We're blocking trade until you do something about helping us with the border. We need tougher action in what we're doing. And I'm not saying maybe that's the best thing, but it was effective. And I need to hear from you guys, and feel free to call my office, slip something under the door anonymously, as long as it doesn't blow up, and just let me know what. And it's probably our fault. And if you guys would just say, if you knuckleheads in Congress would allow us to do this, we would get better results. Because what we're doing, I'm not seeing it work as good as it should for the amount of money put into it and the amount of effort that you guys put in. And I appreciate what you said about the Mexican law enforcement. They're out there every day risking their life, but you got corrupt mayors, you got a mayor can't get elected hardly and speak out. They get murdered the next day. Or the president, if the president of the country of Mexico is that corrupt, how the heck do you expect anybody else to be? So we have got to do something different. And if they want to go to China, I hate to say let them, because they're going to be coming back and realize that China is going to dictate to them everything they do. And I think we need to focus on what we're going to do with the allies that believe the way we believe and the things that we do, and we need to draw that line in the sand. You're either with us or you're not. You choose. I'm not going to dictate to you what you do. And it was more of a rant. Anybody got any further comments, if the chairman will allow me?
You got 30 seconds.
30 seconds if somebody wants to chime in. Mr. Glenn, you had your hand up first.
I appreciate the concern. It's one that we all deal with every day as we do our jobs. How do we make this more effective? How do we make it work? Just one piece of data. 49% of the cocaine interdicted in the Western Hemisphere is done by partner nations. They're capable and able to do that because of the assistance that we provided. If they weren't interdicting that 49%, it falls on us to do it, and it's expensive once it gets inside the country.
And then we've got to look internally on why are we using so much drugs in this country. I mean, we've got the demands. I appreciate what y'all do, and I hope you don't take that too critical. Thank you.
Yeah, I would just add, I think you've heard from all three of us when we talk about the results of the programs versus the political will of our partner governments. You can have really good programs with all your metrics and evaluations that show that you have created a capability. The cops are capable of investigating a crime, uncovering corruption and all of that. But if you have a senior official who's taking money from El Chapo or something, it's not going to get the result. So it's more of a political and a program problem. And I think you pointed to, I mentioned that our president had said with the 3 countries in Central America, we're going to cut this off until we see some political will.
And I support it.
Yeah, so that's the kind
Mr.
of
Chairman,
thing we need to find.
You remember when we were down there on that first Codell I went on, we were in Mexico, and they were talking about the $2 billion in the DEA and all the stuff we're doing on drugs, and we've been doing it for year after year after year, but yet drugs keep coming and coming and coming. And I said, do you guys have the want to end this? And they said, well, of course we do. Well, the results aren't showing that. And I shared a story about my mom wanted me to play the piano. And for 7 years, she sewed and got the money for little Ted to play the piano. 7 years later, I can't play the piano. You know why? I didn't want to. Do they want to change? And if they change, they will change. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I don't know about little Ted, but I have some questions. You know, I've been dealing for years with Colombia, and one of the things that struck me was the amount of growth that President Santos left behind, and of the coca growth. And now President Duque has to deal with what he was left with. And once it starts, it's very difficult to stop. Where are we in terms of trying to reduce the amount of growth in Colombia?
Maybe appropriately, I can begin and John can finish, because that's kind of how we see this going. Look, eradication efforts and interdiction efforts are key at the front end of this. There has to be a deterrent to the behavior. The cultivation of coca is too lucrative. There's no alternative development program without there being a stick to disincentivize it that will be more profitable and replace a farmer's revenue that they get from coca. So we provide the stick. We provide the disincentive for the activity. Because of President Duque and his commitment to eradication, we are seeing great advancement. They are working on getting aerial eradication, which is a tool. It is not the solution. It is a tool that they can use to effectively go about eradicating coca. They have quadrupled the number. I think they've gotten up to 159, if I'm not mistaken, manual eradication forces. That is a vast increase over what they were left with when they took over the presidency. So we're seeing positive developments and movements.
Did President Santos drop the ball on this?
I don't want to say that the President Santos dropped the ball. I think he had a different vision. He thought that peace would bring a commensurate reduction without having to go with the stick. I think the stick is absolutely necessary.
Thank you, Congressman. As you stated, USAID and INL work hand in glove throughout the world, and particularly in the Western Hemisphere, in Latin America, and in the Caribbean. So with the advent of peace, the Duque administration now has more access to areas where they previously did not have access to. So thanks to partnership with INL, there are more secure places for USAID programming to take place. So I mentioned the land titling is just one program that helps with downgrading recidivism for growth of coca. There are other programs as well. We work with the private sector to increase growth in the private sector. I was recently in Colombia. The first event I was there was something called the Rural Financial Initiative, where it's private sector banks going out to rural areas previously controlled by FARC and narco-terrorism, and they're helping campesinos and others with private sector loans and banking services. What this allows is the growth of entrepreneurship in these areas, denying spaces for narco-terrorists to operate, leading to licit economies. So those are the examples we have in terms of just helping make these areas more secure, and we are seeing progress.
And Mr. Secretary, I've been reading about Chile. I just can't believe that just because they raised the tolls on, as you come to New York, on the train, that it caused all these problems. Do you see anything else that is causing that?
Yeah, I must say, Mr. Chairman, I share your suspicions that there's more to it, and we've seen, and we're still analyzing, but for example, we had some pretty good reports the other day that there was a lot of external actor activity on social media, stirring up violence with misinformation and this kind of thing coming from our friends.
Internationals.
Russia, in this case.
That's what I just read an article about that. That basically this is the most stable country it's been for the last few years. And this is another example of where Russia tries to undermine our efforts everywhere in the world. They are not good friends, you know. Their intention is to destroy this country. And I really do believe that what's happening in Venezuela is all part of an invasion without arms, sending 4 million people out, trying to destabilize Colombia, trying to destabilize others, trying to destabilize the entire region. And I know that they probably had a hand in it. But I would, you know, I know that you're probably keeping track, as I am, of what is happening in Chile and the influence, the external influence that's happening there. Thank you. Ranking Member?
Yeah, I was going to ask a question, but I think I'd rather just follow up on what you raised because it's so important. We got these experts here. You know, there's activities of Hezbollah, like I mentioned, particularly down by Paraguay. These Russians, we got Iran. There's rumors of Iran and Nicaragua. Maybe just while you're all here together, just generally, if we could get your thoughts on how widespread and what these people who oppose the United States are doing, and any thoughts what we might do about it in the short run.
Maybe I can start. I mean, you named most of the bad actors there. I would add to that Cuba, which built up a capability throughout the region going back decades, where influence in different organizations, unions, student organizations, journalism, and so on, and they were able to turn that up and down. You've got the Hezbollah operating, as you mentioned, in the area with Paraguay and Argentina. But you know, these are, and then Russia. Russia clearly is involved with Venezuela. They sort of very visibly sent troops there to try to buck up Maduro. They are providing the lifeline in terms of Rosneft marketing oil when nobody else will buy Venezuelan oil, and they're using them, basically trying to evade the sanctions and provide effort there. So there are a lot of malign actors in here that are acting against our interests and against the interests of our partners in the region, and we're working it hard, but it's very much a factor. It's not. This is not all homegrown. There's a lot of people playing around in a very bad way.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Anybody else have a thought before we wrap up here?
Certainly, USAID programs for democracy and governance throughout the region. What we're seeing is certainly the primary malevolent actor in the region is Cuba, the most repressive. So we have our program supporting democratic government. Civil society within Cuba. What we're seeing replicated is the use of the Cuban playbook in Venezuela, Nicaragua, and in other countries as well. So it's not just a playbook. Sometimes, we're hearing stories and allegations of Cuban actors physically in these countries as well. So there's no doubt whatsoever that the Cuban is the biggest malign actor in the region and is seeking to destabilize democratically elected governments and free society.
I would just mention quickly that one aspect of foreign assistance that doesn't get recognized as much is the facilitating effect that the money has in terms of helping our U.S. interagency law enforcement interact with partners in Latin America to confront these kinds of issues and to be the premier partner. So that it's not Russia, it's not China. When they look for assistance and when they look for help on criminal issues in their own country, they turn to the FBI, they turn to the DEA, they turn to ICE or CBP or HSI or the Marshals or TSA or any number of the partners that we help to facilitate.
Thank you.
Well, thank you all for being here today for this important hearing. Promoting the democratic transition in Venezuela, addressing the root causes of migration from the Northern Triangle, and confronting the challenge posed by China will require a sustained commitment from the United States to support our regional allies. I look forward to continuing to work with my colleagues on a bipartisan basis to deepen our engagement with the Western Hemisphere. I thank all the witnesses and all the members that are here today. With that, this hearing is adjourned.